Hey y'all, it's Ashley at Bookistrum and I am back with another day of Vlogmas. It's day number 16. This is crazy. Every time I sit down to like film one of these videos, and most times when I am sitting down and filming these videos, I'm filming multiples at the same time. So if you pay close attention, you can kind of tell because the setup will remain the same. The only thing that's changing is my top, and my bottoms don't change usually. I'm wearing pajama bottoms, but you know, you don't see the bottom half of me, so it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. But anyway, as you can see from the title of this video, we are here to talk about my favorite books written by Black authors. So I had such a hard time thinking about a song that I wanted to use, or I wanted to use this song, and I was having trouble figuring out how could I use this in Vlogmas. And shout out to Bree and Erica for trying to help me navigate quite a few of the things that I've been doing for Vlogmas. I really appreciate their assistance. But yes, so the song is clearly Silent Night by The Temptations, and Silent Night is a household favorite for a lot of people. It is one of the OG classics when it comes to holiday songs. However, for me, I grew up listening to the Temptations version of Silent Night. The version that is done by the Temptations is a household staple in the Black community. We have this running joke that is Silent Night starts with "in my mind," and that's how the song begins, because that's how the Temptations begin that song. And a while ago on Twitter, I ran a poll and I was like, which version of Silent Night is better? And there are some people who, and I'm not making this a whole monolith thing, like I'm not saying the entire Black community, this is their household staple, but for a lot of the Black community, Silent Night is a household favorite. It is a staple. You know it as soon as it comes on. You know when that voice drops and says, "in my mind," do 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 do, like, you know automatically that is the Silent Night done by the Temptations. So I decided to put my own spin to this, and I decided to make a list of some of my favorite books by Black authors. Now, is this list in its entirety? Absolutely not. There's no way. And also, I tried to steer away from mentioning books that I've already discussed in some of these videos. Sometimes it's difficult for me not to have some overlap, but if I've mentioned a book before, I try not to mention it for a second time, just so you're not watching me talk about the same books over and over again. So I picked out 10 books that I have absolutely enjoyed, absolutely have loved, but I don't think I've talked about these much on my channel. There's one that is on this list that I have talked about a lot because I talk about this author a lot, so it's no surprise, but I needed to include this book because it just has been one of the highlights of 2020 for me. So as always, with all of the songs and all the videos that we've done so far, let's talk a little bit about the song. It won't be long because there's not a lot, because I'm not going into the history of Silent Night itself, but more so just about the Temptations version. So the version of Silent Night that was recorded by the Temptations was done in the 1970s, specifically 1970, and it was on their first, I believe, holiday album called Christmas Card, and this album was produced with Motown Records. And this is interesting because this specific album featured Eddie, Paul, Dennis, Otis, and Melvin. So this was not a record that was done with the original five. As I always say, the original five is Eddie, Paul, Otis, Melvin, and David Ruffin. At this point, David Ruffin was no longer in the group and he was replaced by lead singer Dennis. Now for this specific song, I've seen the lead vocals credited to Eddie, which is true. I think that Eddie does a lot of the vocals, Dennis does a small part, and then when you hear the bass come in that's super deep, it is Melvin's voice that you hear. So I definitely will leave a link to the song down in the description box for you all to check out. So the first one that I actually have on this list is one that I have not talked about in almost 6 or 7 years, and it's because it was never finished. I think these books are out of print. As a matter of fact, when I get finished filming this, I'm gonna see if I could actually find copies of this book, because it is such a interesting graphic novel. I'm hesitant to call it a comic, but technically it is a webcomic, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So on this list first, I have Bayou by Jeremy Love. This was a part of DC's imprint that was going to be a webcomic line. I don't think it ever went anywhere, unless I just don't know that it exists, but I don't know anything about it. And this is about a young girl who lives in Mississippi, and she has a friend that is a white little girl. I believe her father is a sharecropper, and the little girl goes missing. The white girl goes missing, and her father is being accused, not the white girl, the black girl's father is being accused of the disappearance of the white girl. So the black girl disappears into this alternate universe where she's battling evil creatures, and she befriends this swamp creature by the name of Bayou, and it's almost like it's an alternate version of our world. And I never knew what happened, because this was never continued. There was only 2 volumes. There never was a volume 3 to my knowledge. So a lot of times when I read this, I wondered if maybe what we were seeing was her way of coping with what was going on in her world, and that this was a way for her to escape dealing with reality, but she was dealing with reality at the same time, because on this journey her whole goal is to figure out a way to stop her dad from getting lynched. And I think that maybe this was kind of a way to show what she would be dealing with in a fantastical way. So this is one that I really enjoyed. I rated the first volume 5 stars, and I probably rated the second volume 5 stars. If I didn't, it probably got 4. And nothing ever came of it, y'all. And it's so disappointing, because one of the best graphic novel webcomic things that I've read. So after this video, I'm definitely going to see if I can hunt down a copy of volume 1 and volume 2. They probably are no longer in print, to be quite honest. The next one that I have on this list is Homegoing by Ya Jessie, which I think quite a few people on BookTube have read Homegoing, or at least have heard of Homegoing by Ya Jessie. If not, they probably have heard about it by this time, because of course Ya Jessie's second book, Transcendent Kingdom, came out this year. So Homegoing for me was a heck of an experience. It's been 4 years since I read it. I believe I read it in 2016, gave it 5 stars, absolutely loved it. If you didn't know, it follows 2 sisters who are both from Ghana, and they take 2 separate paths, or they end up on 2 separate paths. One ends up marrying, I believe, a white man, if I'm not mistaken. My details are kind of fuzzy here, because it's been a minute since I've read this book. I mean, we're talking 4 years here. And she is living, I don't want to necessarily say in the lap of luxury, but she's living a comfortable lifestyle. And then her sister is actually sold into slavery. So after the point where we're getting a narrative with the both of them included in it, we get these divergent storylines where we follow the lineage of each one of the sisters. One, of course, that's maintained in Ghana, and the other that is taking place in America. And when I say just breathtakingly beautiful, I definitely, oh my gosh, great family saga. And I believe I read another family saga last year, and I don't want to compare it, but I think what I liked about what Ya Jessie did with this is that the transitioning between generations was easy to follow. And I really enjoyed the fact that she made it so accessible for us to transfer in between generations. Because sometimes with family sagas, what ends up happening, and specifically in one book that I read last year, it was hard to tell where we were in the familial line, and it was very abrupt, and very much so written in a way where I did not even realize that family members had died. But Ya Jessie does it so seamlessly, where you are never in a moment of confusion about where you are in each line of the sisters' generations. And it made me super interested in researching my own familial history, my own genealogy, and figuring out where my roots are, especially with a parent that is from here, from the States, and having a parent that has lineage in England and Jamaica, and that just makes things like super complex. And knowing that, you know, I have Portuguese roots as well, I just think that this definitely fosters that interest. But definitely, if you're interested in family sagas, I believe that Homegoing is the way to go. It's just a beautifully written book, and I was very surprised that this was her first novel. I was shocked that it was her first novel because it was just so well done and just exceptional. The next one that I have on this list is You Can't Touch My Hair and Other Things I Still Have to Explain by Phoebe Robinson. Sorry I had to look down because that title is so long that I would have messed it up. But I believe I read this one a while ago too, probably about 4 years ago. But this is one that's interesting, and why I'm surprised that it's one that I still think about and one that I consider my favorites, because this, it seemingly comes off as it's going to be a book just about like black hair and black hair culture, but it's so much more than that. And it definitely touches a lot on the black experience, and specifically what it's like to be a black woman. And I think that in my adult life, this was one of the first books that I read specifically geared towards what it was like to be a black woman in the United States. So I think that a great portion of this was an emotional connection that I had with feeling seen, and watching Robinson write a book in which she does not censor herself or allow herself to be silenced in any way because of the fact that she wants to give a full picture. Now, it took me, and I'm thinking about how I wrote my review for this one, it took me about a good 80 to 90 pages to actually get into it. And at first I didn't think that I was going to like this book, which is why I'm so surprised that it's a book that I think about and one that I would consider a favorite, because of the fact that I didn't think I was going to enjoy it, because Phoebe is more so of a comedian. She's not this prolific writer. So there were sections of it that were a little wordy, and sections that I thought could have been like kind of cut down, or she could have added something else in its place. But I think it was my experience in reading this. I think my emotional connection to this book is what puts it up on this list of favorites, because it was my first time reading a book that is definitely a connection to a experience of a black woman, which I think now there's more conversations happening about that, about intersectionality and fitting within two marginalized groups and how that affects your experiences. And since then, of course, I have read other books that have probably done this a little bit better, but it would be remiss of me not to include this book on this list, for the simple reason that it is such an important part of my reading experience. Next, I have Behold the Dreamers by Mbolo Mbiu. I'm probably saying her name awfully wrong, but this is one that I read. These are all books that I feel like I've read quite a few years ago, but these are books that are just super important, that I feel like I don't know why I don't talk about these books any more than I do on my channel, but this is the time for me to talk about them. And I think I read this one probably 2 or 3 years ago. I'm pretty sure this was 2 or 3 years ago that I ended up reading this book. And this is about a couple that immigrate to the United States from Cameroon, and what ends up happening is the husband gets a job as a chauffeur for this elite wealthy white family. I believe that the husband works for Lehman Brothers as probably an executive finance. I don't know. I'm not sure what his job title exactly is, but I do know that he works at Lehman Brothers. And I think that our main character from Cameroon is obsessed with this idea of the American dream, and this is a big, I mean huge, I think, analysis of the faulty images that Americans kind of put out in terms of the American dream. Anybody can come here and have the American dream and everything is accessible, and if I can make it, you can make it, and it's just not true. And I think that this book does a great job of tackling that narrative and really illustrating that the American dream is not accessible to everyone, and that even those who appear to have the American dream don't really have it, because when the husband and wife from Cameroon get to know the white American couple, they start to see cracks in this surface image of what they have been attempting to portray, and they learn more about this family and how they're not as good off as they may seem that they are. So this was great. This was one that I mean, annotated very seriously. I mean, I had like, I don't know if y'all can see, I had like note cards in this one, because I just felt like this was just such an important book for me to be reading at the time, and one that I do need to do a reread of. I know that the Black Prose Club actually read it this year, and they had a discussion on it. And if that's still uploaded, which I think it is, I'll make sure I'll link that in the card symbol above. But if you have not picked up this book, I highly recommend it. It is definitely a favorite of mine, and one that I do need to do a reread of. I could not put this on here, y'all. I guess I could have not put it on here, but when I think about my favorite books, for me, when I say favorites, a lot of times it's about books that I can't stop thinking about, books that I can't stop talking about, books that I continuously recommend, books that have had such an emotional or mental impact on my personal life. Those are my favorite books. Now, sometimes they're not necessarily these prolific literary masterpieces. It's very much so a personal thing. And as much as I have talked about Long Way Down and Jason Reynolds, y'all, I could not make this list without including Jason. I just couldn't. I couldn't do it. I have read this book 2.5 times. I'm in the process of doing a reread, okay? I have read this book 2.5 times this year. And for me to be on my third, almost pretty much on my third read of this book, it's ridiculous. That means that this is a book that I'm really enjoying, and one that I absolutely just can't stop thinking about. And I think it is the ambiguity of the ending of this book that is driving me crazy. So I keep rereading it because I'm trying to figure out what happened truly at the end of this book. And when I heard Jason Reynolds speak this year, he was saying some things that kind of pushed some factors out the way. But there's just more to the story. There's something else. There's answers in here. And I know that there's answers in here because he put it on Instagram one day that someone figured something out. But I don't know. But this book is about a character by the name of Will. And Will's brother ends up shot. And when someone dies in the neighborhood, there's rules that you follow, rules that Will has been taught, like you don't snitch, you know, you're not supposed to cry over it, and you are supposed to get revenge. And this is Will's story of contemplating going and getting revenge for his brother's death. And what's so crazy about this whole story is that he's on his way down from his apartment, going down the elevator, about to go shoot the guy who he thinks shot his brother. And he starts encountering some people, and I don't even want to tell you who he encounters, but this book is very much so an I want to say an ode, but it is a work that's very intentional on discussing the cyclical violence that happens in communities of color. I think especially in Black communities, and how we have kids who get involved in gun violence and become gang affiliated, and it's just a cycle. We have kids fighting battles of adults that occurred 40 years prior to them even being born, and they have no idea where these acts of aggression and violence have even come from, but they're a part of it. And you can see that in this book, that Will himself is contemplating becoming a part of this cycle of violence without even knowing if the person that he's about to shoot is actually the person that killed his brother. He doesn't even know for sure. He's just he's guessing that this has got to be the person because X, Y, and Z. And this is just such a powerful book. Like, if I'm prone to read a book multiple times, like I'm telling you, 9 times out of 10 it's going to end up on a favorites list. So there's no way I couldn't include this book on this list. If you haven't read it, I would recommend listening to, well, I would recommend both ways. I would recommend reading a like a physical copy of it or an ebook or whatever, just reading it yourself. And then I also recommend listening to it on audio, because Jason Reynolds reads it himself, and the author's note at the end is super important, and that's all I'm gonna say. The next one that I have on this list is The Mothers by Brit Bennett. I think that a lot of people now are familiar with Brit Bennett because they have read The Vanishing Half, which a lot of people were talking about this summer, but The Mothers is actually Brit Bennett's debut novel, which I read 4 years ago. I think 2016 and 2017, I just had a lot of books that I was enjoying. But The Mothers is a very interesting look at so many different things. It focuses on a teenage girl by the name of Nadia who has been attempting to get over her mother's suicide. She meets with a boy in the community that results in an unplanned pregnancy, and there are a lot of ups and downs that happen in this book. But what is so interesting about it is that we kind of get this collective narrative of this group of women called the Mothers, who are part of the upper room of the church. So before I go into that, I will love to say that this was an interesting book for me, and I enjoyed it a lot, not just because of the narrative and the story, but I think I got some perspective of church environments from the West Coast. And I think a lot of times when we talk about Black community and involvement in churches, it is often discussed in terms of the South, because I mean heavily a Bible Belt, a lot of Southern Baptists here, and a lot of Black communities involved in the church. But I had never read a book that specifically focused on the narrative of the church community in the western part of the United States. So that was a really interesting element. But the Mothers are a group of women that basically pass judgment on people who are coming to the church. They watch, they read the room essentially. And it was very interesting to get their collective voices as part of this narrative and the commentary that they would make. So it was almost like watching a movie and having like the director's notes. Like, you know how you have the DVD special where the director is watching the movie with you and they make commentary as you're watching the movie. It kind of had that vibe to it, except instead of the director just basking in the beautiful product that they have turned out, it was very much so from a point of view of judgment and conceit. And it is an ode to the voices of motherless girls. There is some possible sapphic elements, possibilities, not saying that there is definite on page, but it does leave you with some questions about certain relationships. And I kind of like the ambiguous feeling of some parts of this book. But if you liked The Vanishing Half, I would highly recommend checking out The Mothers as well. It is a very, very interesting novel, and I just think that Brit Bennett is just a gifted writer in general, and that she definitely has a lot to offer all literary communities. So I'm very excited to see what she does in the future. The next one that I have here is Theyre the Sun Rise, Memoirs of a War Child. And I never try to say Sandra's last name because no matter how many times I look it up, I just can't remember the pronunciation. So out of respect, I try not to butcher it. I believe that I read this one a few years ago, and it is Sandra telling her story of leaving the Democratic Republic of Congo and surviving a massacre and getting assistance. I believe the UN stepped in her case. Hopefully I'm getting that right, but I believe the UN did step in her case and help her family out and get them to the United States. And I believe they ended up somewhere in the Midwest. I believe specifically they may have ended up in Chicago. But the whole point of this and her telling her story, and why I loved it, was that once again we're going back to this whole perception of what we think an immigrant's or a refugee's story is, and then actually getting the details of what it's really like. So I think prior to me reading this novel, I think I had this misconception that, you know, when the UN steps in and they help refugees and they get them here, everything is good. And it's not. I mean, to be so naive in my thinking, it's amazing to me now that I'm older and I have read more and have learned more. But her family, they were not prepared. I mean, to go, even just climate change itself may seem like a small thing, but it's a huge thing when you're not adequately prepared for that. I think that coming to the United States and, you know, having to deal with the fact of being Black in the United States is a different experience, and it's just not an experience I think that anyone can prepare you for, and it's not anything that people teach. There's no lessons really on like the cultural things that go on here, and watching her have to navigate and learn so much about what it means to be here in the United States, what it means to be Black and here in the United States, and what it means to be a refugee here, and having to navigate how much stuff she went through as a young adult, how much trauma she went through, and having to get through that, and then having to figure things out here was just like, I mean, pillar of strength. I mean, pillar of strength. I would never in a million years want anyone to go through what she went through, but she took that time and opportunity to tell her story, and I am so happy to have read it. It's been, once again, it's been a while since I've read this one, but it is a story that I do think about quite often, and it was such an impactful memoir and such an important memoir that I hope that more people will in time pick up and read. The next one that I have up here is also another graphic novel, and this is Yummy Days, Last Days of a Southside Shorty by Jeaneri, and this one I actually read for a class that I was taking in library school, and this focuses on an actual young boy, 11-year-old boy, who got the nickname Yummy because he liked sweets, and he was just down a path of just bad run-ins with the police. He had been arrested quite a bit, I think, even by the time that you're introduced to his narrative. I mean, at 11 years old, he had been arrested quite a few times, in and out of juvie, and just in and out of our judicial system. And he did not have a good home life, and he was seeking attention and acceptance from a gang. And I think it may have been part of an initiation process where he was told that he needed to probably shoot at the rival gang, and when he shot fire into the rival gang, he accidentally killed a young girl, and then after that they actually found him dead, and he had been murdered by the same gang. I thought he was originally killed by the rival gang, but he was killed by the gang that he was attempting to impress. So this one is hard. This one is really hard, and I'm very hesitant to say favorite because it's not something that you enjoy. There are some books that inform you, but you don't enjoy them because they just are not there for your enjoyment. They're there to educate you, to inform you, to get you to think. And this one definitely, before Long Way Down, this is one that I read that made me really start thinking about the cycle of violence and how it affects inner city youth, and how there are different elements that just continue to perpetuate the violence, and how we're not necessarily having these discussions, these effective discussions about how to better prevent situations like this from going on, because there's no reason why an 11-year-old, first of all, at 11 years old, should have been in and out of the judicial system as much as Yummy had been, and to wind up dead at 11 for trying to impress a group of grown men is unfortunate and sad. And it's a great graphic novel to read, but it is a hard graphic novel to read, but definitely one that has impacted and made an impression on me, and one that I just could not put on this list. The last one that I have on this list is The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. And Colson Whitehead, I think, is one of those authors where he definitely can end up being a hit or a miss. Like, I really enjoyed the Underground Railroad, but I am still, up until now, December, can't tell you how long I've been reading the Nickel Boys. I had been struggling with that one a little bit, but I think that sometimes his writing can be hard, and sometimes it just is not for everyone. And I think that the Underground Railroad definitely is one of those books, and this is on my favorites list because this book challenged me. It was hard for me to read this one, and not emotionally, but literally just structurally, and just getting through it was hard. Not saying that I forced myself to read it, but it was one that I was told, like, stick with it and just keep trying, and it's one that I actually ended up really enjoying it. And had I given up, I probably would have missed out on enjoying a interesting book, because this is the story of a girl or woman by the name of Cora, and she's coming into her womanhood, and she's a slave, and she is making the journey to escape. And this is after, I believe, she meets another slave that kind of tells her about the Underground Railroad. But what's interesting about it is that the Underground Railroad is not like a figurative use of language here. Like, when we talk about the Underground Railroad, it literally is not a railroad. We're talking about just different pathways that people use to escape slavery. No, in Colson Whitehead's book, like, the Underground Railroad is real. Like, it's an actual train with conductors and the whole nine. And that makes it very, very interesting. Some sections were a little bit slow, but I think that the story that Colson Whitehead tells in this book is one worth reading. You can tell that he did a lot of research for this book. You can tell that he took his time with this book. It is impressive. It's I don't want to say like it's not going to be for everybody, but it's not. I don't think that this one is for everyone, but it is one that I know I have appreciated, and one, once again, that I do need to reread. I actually had a physical copy that I annotated the entire thing, and I let someone borrow it. Foolish me. Foolish me. Because now look, I don't have the copy. And they had the copy with all of my annotations. All right, y'all, so that is it. If you have any books that you absolutely love by Black authors, let me know in the comment box below. As always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications. If you're looking for ways to support my channel, the links will be down in the description box below. If you're looking for ways to follow me on social media, that'll be down in the links below as well. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll be back with another video tomorrow.